10 o'clock, Pam, time for us to get going.
It is 10 o'clock. Let's begin. Welcome. It's so good to see you. This is our third webinar of 2022, and we're delighted that you are here to join us. We look forward to interacting with you. Those of you who don't know us, I'm Pam McNaughton. I've been working with CPAS for the last 8 years, and James will introduce himself in a minute. CPAS is an Anglican evangelical mission agency, and we seek to do three things. We resource church leaders to lead churches in mission throughout the UK and Ireland. We run holidays for children and young people, and we act as patrons to around 690 churches. So that's helping churches to discover who their next vicar is going to be. You can find out more about us on the CPAS website, and there'll be a link in the chat for that. Before we pray together, let me ask James just to introduce himself and our topic for today. James.
Good morning, everyone. James Lawrence, also work with Pam for CPAS. I'm really looking forward to spending this hour with you. We're going to be thinking about how to encourage people to return to church when there's been quite a lot of folks who have not yet returned, or maybe have even stepped away. It's the second of two topics around the research which came out at the beginning of the year that we want to sort of work on. And we're going to try and provide a good opportunity for us to generate lots of ideas about things that we might do that might be creative ways of re-engaging people.
Thanks, James. I've noticed the link has gone into the chat for the handout. If you haven't managed to print it beforehand, you might like to do that now. After we've heard from James, we will be going into breakout rooms to talk about our own ideas and think about Q&A. We've also got exciting news about a new resource we've just published called How to Nurture a Faith-Sharing Culture. We've got 3,000 copies to give away, and we'll say more about those at the end. We will finish, as always, promptly at 11 o'clock, but stay around. James and I will stay around for 20 minutes or so if anyone wants to stay and ask further questions. So, folks, let's pray together. Let's down tools. Remember to breathe and pray. We're going to hear some words from Hebrews 10. Verse 23, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Loving God, we thank you that you are faithful. And as we spend time together today, we pray that we can provoke one another to love and good deeds, that we can encourage each other, and that we can find good ways to encourage others to return to church. Be with us, Lord, by your Spirit, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So we're going to hand over to James for his input. Do post your comments and questions in the chat. If you put questions in capitals, we're more likely to get to them at the Q&A at the end, because we'll spot them easily. Thanks so much, James.
Thanks so much, Pam. Well, let me, if I may, just share my screen as we dive into this subject of how to encourage people to return. And that verse from Hebrews is such a helpful reminder, isn't it? Such a helpful way of just framing our conversation this morning, the importance of meeting together as the people of God. And you may have been on our last webinar where we talked about some research which was published right at the start of the year, published by Evangelical Alliance Stewardship and IDO on what they called the changing church. And it highlighted some things that we wanted to do a little bit of time to. 59% of churches decrease in volunteering, and that was the topic of our previous webinar in January. In February. And if you didn't attend that, then our YouTube channel has got that recording, and you may want to go back and look at that one. Here's the one that we're going to be focusing on today. Average on-site attendance has dropped by 32%. Now, of course, that statistic is a few months old, and anecdotally, some people have been returning, I think, over these last few months since that piece of research was done. But as I've listened to church leaders around the country over these last few weeks, certainly not everyone. And you may be thinking at this point, James, surely it's too late to be addressing this topic. People's minds are pretty much made up. If they've not come back now, they may not be coming back. But what I want to suggest is, well, maybe not quite. There's a lot of things still changing. So I think people are still open to reconnecting. But what I want to suggest is this, that there's a window of opportunity as we come out of this part of the pandemic that may be open for perhaps another 3 or 4 months. My hunch is we need to make the most over these next few months in order to reconnect people who would still be open to that. So let me just say one more thing before we dive into the grist of what I want to explore. Just to be clear, we're not focusing today on those who have decided to go elsewhere. I was talking to one church leader and she was telling me how a couple of her congregation members have reevaluated their church attendance and actually had been traveling quite a way to her church, and they've decided through being more connected with their locality to go to their local church. We're not talking about those folks today. And nor at the other end are we going to be talking about those who've decided faith is no longer for them. And sadly, there are some of those people. The group that we're focusing on is that bigger group, those who, as far as we know, aren't going anywhere online or on site, who used to be regular members of our churches. And what I want to do is I want to address 2 things. What's the issue? And I want to offer a few reflections to help us clarify what we're dealing with. And then secondly, what can we do? And at the end of our time in our breakout rooms, we'll have lots of opportunity to share ideas, practical ways that we might re-engage some folks. So let's begin by thinking a little bit about what is the issue? What's going on here? And I want to suggest it is an attendance issue. We do want people to attend the gathered community of the people of God meeting to worship. Why? Well, not just because there is a scriptural mandate that we've just heard from Pam a moment ago in Hebrews, but because actually what we attend to shapes our lives. And that's why habits are so powerful. What we attend to on a regular basis inevitably shape our lives. Now, of course, there may be a whole range of other reasons why we might see it as an attendance issue. For example, we might just simply have a pastoral concern. We want to connect with people to see how they're doing, and therefore we want them to be attending, knowing that that will be helpful for them. There could be a congregational morale issue. It is dispiriting to walk in on a Sunday and to see fewer people than we would normally have had pre-pandemic. There may even be a personal ego issue going on here. And I'm going to say a little bit more about this later on. But what I do want to emphasize at this point is I think it is an attendance issue because attendance matters. And if we ask the question, why aren't people attending? Well, there might be a whole range of reasons. But I think what I'm picking up as I listen to church leaders around the country is this. Most people haven't left church, they have simply stopped attending. They actually still would see themselves as part of church. And actually, this is good news for us. Let me illustrate, if I may, by a little story of somebody in our congregation. I'm going to call him Eli. Pre-pandemic, Eli was a regular attender at Sunday services, involved in a small group, occasionally led some of our men's work. Eli has a long-term faith, now in his early 50s with 2 university-aged children. During the pandemic, his last child left for university. Right from the start of the pandemic, he didn't like online worship. He spent nearly all day in online meetings for his work. He didn't really enjoy them either, just couldn't face more online meetings over the weekend, so simply did not attend online when we were in lockdown. Since restrictions have been eased, he's attended once or twice, but far less frequently than before. He still gives each month through direct debit. And if I went up to Eli and chatted with him, he wouldn't say that he's left church, but the reality is he has stopped coming. He still thinks of the church that he attends as his church. and he still thinks he will go someday, maybe. But in practice, his attendance and engagement is almost zero. And for Eli, it isn't about fear. And I want to suggest that, of course, there are some people for whom fear is the concern, but for the majority, that isn't the issue. It's more about indifference. It's not even a conscious decision for Eli. He just doesn't see it as important at the moment, and he's got out of the habit. Attendance is an issue because what we attend to shapes our lives, and Eli is no longer attending church in any significant way. Secondly, I want to suggest it's a spiritual issue. Disconnected people rarely grow spiritually. Gathering is part of how we grow as the people of God. It's hardwired into our spiritual life because faith is both imitative, it's caught as much as it is taught, and it is communal, shared as much as it is individual. For many years, way before the pandemic, I've often said to people that if a person stops attending church on a Sunday or whenever they did attend church, they'll probably stop attending to Christ Monday to Saturday. Now, that's not a rule, but actually, I think there's some truth in that. This is a spiritual issue. Disconnected people rarely grow spiritually. And it's also, thirdly, a discipleship issue. That's obviously linked to the above in terms of it being a spiritual issue, but I think it's somewhat distinct as well. We may well have seen some cultural Christians drop off, which is sad, but possible. Here's how one church leader put it. COVID sped up what was already happening, the end of Christendom. We no longer have the same number of cultural Christians. And I know some of you will want to reframe the question, not how do we get people back to gathered church life, but how do we best help people grow as disciples of Jesus? And that's right. That is, of course, the question. If we're helping them get closer to Jesus, whether or not they show up in person, they're more likely to know we're serving them and it's not about ourselves. Yeah, absolutely. However, gathering will always be part of how people grow in their relationship with Christ and in their service of him in the world. Because that's the way the church has been, that's the way the Christian faith works. It is both imitative and it is communal. Church is a part of that. And so it is a discipleship issue ultimately, but it's always going to be an issue that involves the gathering of the people of God. And here's the last thing I want to say about what are we dealing with. It is and it isn't a personal issue. I wonder if I may be rather direct. Let's not beat around the bush for a moment. If you're a church leader, this affects us. One vicar told me how her children's group are back to the size they were when she arrived 6 years ago. For 6 years, they've worked really hard to build up their family and children's work, to the point where pre-pandemic, they had around 60 children regularly involved in the life of the church. Now they're back to 6. That is dispiriting. She also told me how their 3 biggest givers have gone and how the church is definitely feeling somewhat emptier on a Sunday. And it's personal for her because it raises questions like, did I not disciple them well over the last few years? Did we not work hard enough at connecting with people during the pandemic? It's personal. She also was incredibly honest and said, there's pride involved in this as well. So it is personal. And as leaders, I think it helps to acknowledge what is going on inside us and at the same time to avoid the trap of taking it too personally. Talking to another vicar this week, he said it was just so helpful to realize it wasn't personal. It's not just in my church that we've seen less people in church. Actually, this is a trend across the country. And he realized it was helpful for it not to be all about him, because ultimately, of course, he knows it isn't. So it is both personal and it isn't personal. What are we dealing with? Well, I think we are obviously dealing with something which is about attendance, something which is spiritual, something which is about discipleship and has an element of personal within it. Well, let me stop for a moment and do one of our little polls that we like to do, and just be fascinated to see where you're at. So coming up on the screen are 4 questions, and just take a couple of moments to have a go at those. Apologies to those of you who can't deal with, can't access polls. I think the majority will be able to scroll down, answer away. Guesstimations are fine. Don't take too long doing the sums. And when you get to the 4th question, where we've given you a range of options, if you can think of other, do post those in the chat. It would be really, really helpful to see what other things you think are driving people's non-attendance. I'll give you a moment or two to fill those in. That's great, thank you. Fascinating watching the results come in. Just give you a few more moments. And just 10 seconds more. And here we go. Let's end the poll and see what we have come up with. Just be fascinating to see where we're at as a group. Here we go. Right, let me share the results. And again, you'll need to scroll down with me. So on that first question, what level of on-site attendance are we at for our main service? There are a few of us who are more than pre-pandemic level. A few of us are at the same, and then a whole spread, around 70% of attendance. That's interesting. That fits with the national statistics that are around at the moment. Seems to be where the majority are, but some of us are still down around 30%. Less than 30% even of on-site attendance. Second question, what percentage of our main service congregation are attending online? Relatively small numbers, up to 30%, and then dropped off significantly at that point. But not an insignificant number of folks are attending online. Third question, of those who are attending online on site, how often are they attending? 47% less than the pre-pandemic, 47% about the same. That's a significant decrease. 40% attending less than before the pandemic. And then reasons why, 82% out of the habit, 55% are concerned about health. That's interesting. 53% other priorities have taken over, and 19% reevaluated life. And there's some stuff going up in the chat in terms of other. Fascinating. Thank you so much for filling that in. Really interesting just to see what the different perspectives are that we have in our particular context. So let me ask the second question and offer, if I may, just a few thoughts about what might we actually do about all of this. And what I want to do is to offer 4 broad suggestions, and then it's going to be over to you in breakout rooms to come up with some detailed ideas. But let me offer you 4 broad suggestions about what we might do and see how these resonate with you. Here's the first. Remind people of what is exciting. In that sense, create a sense of what people are missing. And there are all sorts of ways that we might do that. For example, how about getting people who are attending just to do a 15-20-second video about something that they have found helpful or enjoyable from a gathering that they've been a part of. And when I'm using the word gathering here, I'm not just talking about Sunday services or other services, but the range of gatherings that we might have in the life of the church. Get them to do a 15-second, 20-second video, post it on your website or in your Facebook group or through your WhatsApp group, email it out to people, and encourage the congregation members that are attending to link and like it. Link it and like it so that other people they know might actually get to see it. Generate a sense of actually you're missing out on something by not being a part of what's going on. Remind people of what is exciting, important about being part of church life. Second, broad suggestion, teach about the why of gathering. Winsomely, creatively, continuously, let's remind people about why we gather as the people of God. And some of you might think about that in terms of a mini sermon series, but I also want to suggest that there's a way of doing it through how we promote things, how we introduce things, a whole variety of simple sentences that we can use that remind people about the why of gathering. So, for example, the first sentence that we say at the start of a service can remind people about the why of gathering. Great to see you all this morning as we meet to build each other up in our faith so that we might show and share the faith with others through the week. A simple sentence that reminds people about why we gather. A sentence at the end of the service that reminds people of why we have gathered. All sorts of different small ways, as well as some big ways, to remind people about the why of gathering. I was doing some work yesterday with a bunch of church leaders, and we were talking about how easy it is for people to forget the why, and how we constantly in leadership have to remind people of the why. Those of you who know Simon Sinek's book on that will know some of the reasons why that is so important. Some people will have forgotten about the why, and it'll be helpful to remind them. We can do that through emails that we send out as part of our normal weekly email that maybe goes out to all those who are attached or associated with the church. There's just a whole variety of ways we can do it. Here's the third broad suggestion. Make each gathering good, the best experience it can be. I'm reading this book at the moment. It's called The Art of Gathering by, I've got it upside down, sorry, The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. It's not a Christian book, but it is a fascinating book as she talks about how to gather well. The opening chapter on deciding the why you're really gathering is worth the price of the book on its own. Superb. She says in it, here's the paradox of gathering. There are so many good reasons for coming together that we often don't know precisely why we are doing so. And as I've read this book, it's really made me think hard about how can we in our church and in all the different ways that we gather, make each gathering the very best that it can be. She's got some brilliant suggestions. When we're gathering as the people of God for public worship, we gather, don't we, for the edification of the people, the building up of the body, in order, therefore, that the body may be a blessing to the world through the week. And we do that through all sorts of things. And we know there are some things we need to avoid. Encouragement, excellence are all good things. Embarrassment and entertainment are not such good things. But we meet to build people up, to worship God and to build people up. Well, let's make that gathering the very best it can be. Let's make the small group gathering the very best it can be, so that actually we're encouraging and building others up in their faith. Maybe now is a great time to do a little bit of thinking with one or two others about what could we do to just notch up how we gather in a way which will be helpful to others. And here's the fourth. Invite them to contribute to serving the needs of others. I've heard of a number of churches that have seen people reconnecting who hadn't reconnected because they've been invited to contribute to the humanitarian aid for Ukraine. We're all living with this massive story that is impacting the world. And lots of people out there are desperate to do something about it, want to help and contribute. And this is a great opportunity for us to reconnect people into one of the reasons why we exist as the church. Maybe reconnect some of those who have not yet reconnected, to pray, to give, to serve. A whole variety of different ways that we might reconnect. And alongside that, there'll be all sorts of other things that you're looking to do to serve your community, to bless people as the church. Reconnect people with that stuff so that they feel like they're contributing, that they can offer something. And actually, we may well find some of those folks who've not yet reconnected with us as the gathered people of God wanting to reconnect in other ways. So those are my 4 broad suggestions. We've actually also created a little sheet with 15 specific ideas to encourage people to return. And you can find that sheet both on the website using that website address, and we'll post it in the chat a little bit later on. But what we're really interested in is to have your ideas. And so we're going to do a little exercise, which Pamela's going to explain in just a moment. But in all of this, may I encourage us to remember, as pastors, we don't know what numbers we're going to get back or what our new normal is. We don't know any of that. But we do know that if we trust the God that raises the dead, our labor will not be in vain. As we seek to pray, to pastor, to love, to care for, to reconnect people with the people of God, actually, the God of the resurrection will be at work, and our labor will not be in vain. Let's all take hope in that.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you so much. There's loads to think about there, folks. And in order to do that well, we're going to go into breakout rooms just for 14 minutes to reflect on everything that we've heard. There are some questions in the chat for you to look at. And we would love it, please, if someone in the group would connect to the Padlet board, and there's the link there too, and put your suggestions under the headings that are there on the Padlet board. It's sometimes awkward, isn't it, going into a breakout room with people you don't know, but do introduce yourselves, and then maybe someone can offer to steer the conversation. Someone else can put stuff on the Padlet board, but it helps us to earth the things that we've talked about. So do make sure that your camera is on, because it's weird to have someone in a breakout room without their camera on. And we'll see you in 14 minutes. And at that point, we'll have some time to explore some Q&A with James. So do think about anything that you would like to ask when you come back. Thank you so much, and we'll see you. Have a good time in your breakout rooms. Welcome back. If you've been unmuted, if you could mute at this point, that would be great, just so that we don't get loads and loads of background noises. Folks, we'd love to move on now and to get some good Q&A going. So we want to keep James on his toes, so please think of some really good questions, tough questions to ask him, and to put them in the
simple,
chat.
easy ones, please.
No, difficult ones, and we'll put them to him. We've got a few from earlier on. James, let me ask you to start us off. What about this whole thing about streaming services? Should we be thinking that it's something that comes to an end at some point? Does it become counterproductive? What's going on? What do you see and hear about that?
Yes, I do know, I did come across one church recently who have decided to close down their streaming because they want people to actually physically regather. I personally wouldn't recommend that, and here are the reasons why. I think streaming is a great thing to do because there are 2 groups of people in particular who will significantly benefit from it. Those who are physically unable to gather in a place because of whatever condition they might have, actually can still therefore join in with the gathered worship of the people of God. And I know that folks in that community have been asking for that for years. The pandemic suddenly made that accessible to them, and it would be a great pity to close that down. Secondly, second group of people, lots of research is showing that increasingly people will check us out online on several occasions before actually physically coming to a building. And for the sake of mission, it would be a great pity to close down that opportunity for people to sort of take a look at us online and gauge with us in that way. And for those 2 reasons, I'd encourage us, if we are able to keep going with the online stuff, do keep going on with the online stuff. The important thing is to explain to people, both on site and online, why, if it is possible for people to gather on site, that is still a really good thing to do.
Thank you. Someone who returned to church just this last Sunday said to me said to a friend of mine after the service, I had forgotten the richness of worshipping with people in the same physical space. Yeah.
And I think we've got to do everything we can to remind people, as I said in my little talk, to remind people about what they're missing out on, that there are some distinct advantages to gathering online, and we need to just simply drop those in and remind people of them.
So At the same time, we do have to do our online stuff really well, don't we? And there are comments on chat about it's more than, if we're going to have online congregations, it's more than just live streaming.
Yes.
And we did a lot of work during lockdown to work out whether you could still call it church when you're online. And we don't want to lose all of the possibilities there.
Yes.
You've got anything else you want to add to that?
Yes. Well, I mean, as you said, Pam, over the last couple of years, we've talked quite a bit about this. The key is to do everything you can to to help people who are online engage and participate rather than observe. Because if you can engage them and encourage them to participate, then actually it'll be a much better experience for them. And in that sense, it's not the same as watching something on Netflix. What we are trying to do is to actually be the people of God, gathered online and on site. And there's all sorts of little things you can do to help with that, which we've spoken about before. And there's lots of suggestions and ideas out there online. If you want to just Google it, you'll find all sorts of good things.
There are other comments, James, in the chat, and again, this has come up over time about how people have linked together well across circuits or deaneries or big
Yes.
multi-parish benefices, and those are advantages we don't want to lose. I wonder what you would have to say to someone who says, why do we always think of gathering as Sunday mornings? Why not a Bible study group? Isn't that just as good?
Yes, and I sort of alluded to that, maybe I needed to allude to it a bit more strongly. Yes, there are lots of different ways we gather as the people of God. And obviously, some people will gather for public worship on a Sunday, some people will gather for public worship on other days, and there are other ways that we gather: Bible studies, cell groups, various community action projects that we might be involved in, all sorts of different ways that we gather. And at every level, let's encourage people to meet up and gather. However, there is something about what happens when we gather for worship together, for the building up of the body, whatever day of the week we choose to do that, in whatever form we do that, that I think is central to the life of the church. The teaching of the word, the sharing of the sacraments, they're all part of our gathered life. And somehow we need to be encouraging people into those aspects of our gathered life alongside Bible study groups or other ways that we might do that.
Thank you. And one person just asks, in the light of online stuff, are you aware, I don't think I am, of any decisions taken about helping people to do communion remotely?
So the Church of England in the Church of England, there's been an enormous debate about that over the course of the pandemic, and guidelines have gone out from, I think, just about every diocese to the clergy about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So you'll just need to follow the guidelines that have been issued. Okay,
thank you. So let's go with, what about the people who say they still have faith but are not convinced that church is the best way to engage with their faith? How can we have a conversation with them?
That's a great question. I think a couple of reflections on that. First of all, really good to have the conversation with them if you're in that position where you can do that, where you actually find out what's going on here. Because there could be a whole variety of reasons why they've made that statement. So let's explore, let's ask questions, let's listen carefully. Second reflection is this, that for some people, the way we're doing church is not particularly working. And it may well be that we need to rethink how we gather as the people of God. There are all sorts of lessons we've learned over the last 2 years that I hope we can introduce and continue into the life of our gatherings. But there are churches that have started up new ways of gathering because they're trying to connect with a slightly different group of people. So let's not be too wedded to particularities around our form of gathering. Let's be open to some new possibilities, things that might actually make it a better way of engaging with God and with people through the way that we gather. So this is an opportunity, really. But I think the combination of listen carefully, find out what actually is going on. Sometimes that statement, if I'm really honest, is used as an excuse, and there's no real weight behind it. Other times there's real weight behind it, and we want to engage with what the reasons are. The combination of that and reflecting on how we gather and what can we learn to improve the ways that we are gathering. This is a season of opportunity for us to do that. Thank
you, James. And as has happened during the pandemic, there's a great cry going on in the chat for families who've disappeared, families who've got other things on Sunday mornings. How do we particularly re-engage with our families?
If I may just offer what I hope is an encouragement in one bizarre sort of way, and that's this: if you have seen lots of your families not return, you are not on your own. That is the group that lots of churches have seen not return. So what do we do? I think in many ways we're going to do what we've been talking about throughout this last period, about how important it is for the personal connection. Anything that we can do that actually enables us to have a personal connection with the family, conversation with the family, an invitation personally to the family will be of benefit. And the second thing to say is that it may well be that there are creative ways of using the Easter season to re-engage those families. And we've put a couple of ideas on that 15 ideas sheet that we've created. There's a bunch of ideas that are actually on the Padlet board, and we'll send you the link to that again following today. So there may be some specific things around the Easter period that we can do that might reconnect some of those folks. But the more personal we can be in the invitation to those things, the more that we can have one-on-one conversations with those families. Somebody posted it in the chat, in the Padlet board, yes, but don't make that just the vicar's job. And yes, if at all possible, let's not make that just the vicar's job, because they won't have time to do it all. Let's involve others who might also have those one-on-one conversations with others. Make it personal though, and be encouraging in the way that you engage, not judgmental in the way that you engage.
There have also been some comments, James, that the Jubilee celebrations are a good way of getting people back on board.
Yes.
And that lots of churches are thinking not just online, on-site, but also outdoors.
Yes.
And stuff outdoors works really well for families.
Yeah.
And then the other one is social things for families, but also for others. Is there anything you want to say about social things?
Yes, really good to think about the use of social things. And again, just if I may, using this book as a little tool to help us in our thinking, try to be really clear about why you're having that social event, who the social event is for, and therefore what is the best way to construct it. One of the things I love about this book is she emphasizes that it's not simply enough to put something on. You actually have to be proactive and intentional in terms of the way that you host it. And that applies to whether it's a bunch of people around your house for a meal, through to a social event, reconnecting families to church, through to what happens on the Sunday morning or a Wednesday afternoon or wherever it is that we gather as the people of God for public worship. Not just putting it on, but thinking very, very carefully about what is the best way for this to run. That will be a real help for social events that we do put on.
And then from a leader's point of view, there are so many pressures at the moment, stuff from diocese and the national church and all sorts of things going on. Have you got any tips on how we prioritize as church leaders getting the time to do those personal relationship things?
Yeah, gosh, that is a difficult one, and I recognize fully just how much there is on church leaders' plates at the moment. When it comes to priorities, prioritizing, one of the keys, I think, is to just put in the diary, if nothing else, put in the diary 15 or 30 minutes to think and to pray. So even if that 30 minutes can't get in the diary until next week or the week after next, put it in the diary nonetheless, and just protect that time to think and pray. Because what we're trying to do is to think out our priorities under God. And those two bits are so important, to think and under God, which is why the pray bit is so important. And as we do that, to try and discern what are the 2 or 3 things that over the next few weeks we're going to really give attention to. And some people find it helpful to think about that on a day basis, a week basis, and a 6-week basis. What am I going to give attention to today? What am I going to give attention to over the next week? What am I going to give attention to over the next 6 weeks? But just identify 2 or 3 things. What am I going to give attention to? And then if you've got that clear, you're far more likely to give attention to those things, which is why the think and pray bit is so important. Discern and then work on those things that you have discerned. But let's be honest, it's not going to be easy. There's so many pressures, so many demands. And the trouble with that is that it leads us to become reactive and never proactive. We just react to what's the most immediate and urgent. Whereas if we thought a little bit and prayed a little bit, we might just get a bit more on the proactive side. And that's where we want to spend at least some of our time, not all of our time, in reactive mode.
Thank you so much. We've probably got 1 minute for one more before we begin to wrap up. But James, it's quite sobering, isn't it, that somebody has said that there are people coming to church because of what's going on in Ukraine, because they are afraid. I wonder whether you wanted to say anything about how we can most help those people.
So again, this is, I mean, it sounds a bit crass to say opportunity, but I think we have the opportunity as the people of God, as church, to again place ourselves at the center of our community and say, if you're concerned, come, hold a vigil, hold a prayer meeting, do it in ways that make it accessible and engaging for those who might not normally come to church. Talk about ways in which people can offer to help, and through your church provide those avenues in creative and appropriate ways, because there are people who obviously are deeply concerned. I mean, is there anybody who's not actually deeply concerned about what's going on in Ukraine and the implications of that, both now and on into the future, with some of these things that are coming out around the timescale that this is likely to play out on, not being measured in weeks or months, but in years. So let's recognize the concerns that people have and provide a space in which they can be voiced, owned, and we can bring them to the God that we believe ultimately is at work in his world. I know I am praying for a miracle, because I think the only solution to this particular issue is a miracle.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much. Folks, we're coming up to the end of our time. There's just a few things we'd like to tell you about before that happens, but also to say, although we'll finish at 11, James and I will both be around for another 20 minutes or so if you've still got questions and you've got time to stay and ask them. So just to remind you, the resources that we've mentioned throughout the webinar and others are listed in our resources handout, which you can download from our website using the link in the chat. We'll also send the link to you again tomorrow in an email. We've got a variety of events coming up over the next few months, but there's one in particular we'd like to tell you about: the launch of our new version of our Growing Leaders Youth Edition. This is revised and redesigned. It's been very popular over the years, but this one will fit with young people today better than the old one. And James is going to do a launch event with the author Ruth Hassel, and for one lucky person, there'll be a free copy of the course being given away at that launch. The launch is on the 6th of April at 9:15 for 45 minutes. If this thing about young people and teenagers is the bit you struggle with most in your church, then this would be a really good thing to come to. We've got another new resource that I mentioned at the beginning. James, tell us more about that.
So just 2 weeks ago, we launched this, How to Nurture a Faith Sharing Culture. And it's a book trying to help us think through, how do we place faith sharing at the heart of the life of our churches, just about the way we do church, rather than it being on the periphery for a few people. It's actually a book, but a whole suite of other resources. And we're delighted that due to the generosity of a donor, we've got 3,000 copies of this book to give away free to those who are eligible for it. And if you're not eligible, you can still purchase it. If you use that QR code or that link, you can go to the website, find out more details, and if you're eligible, get your free copy sent to you in the post. We're running a whole series of webinars specific to this resource over the coming months. And if you sign up, you'll get details about those and also access to some wider material that's on our webpage. But we're really excited about the opportunity to nurture faith sharing within the lives of our churches. And we're working on this over the next few years in a variety of ways, of which this is one.
James, there are some really encouraging comments about people who've got the book already and what they're saying about it in the chat. So
Great.
Yeah. I think you've got a poll for us just to finish.
Yes, folks, we just, if you would take just literally a moment, sorry, let me just get it up on my screen. We've just got 3 questions. We were delighted if you would take a moment just to answer. Will help us in our planning and preparations for future webinars. They're very simple. How did you hear about today? What's the best day of the week for attending a webinar and the best time? And if you could just do those, and the 4th question. And as they do that, Pam, maybe we could come into land.
Yeah, we will. Just give another few seconds just to do those, and then we'll pray together. Folks, it's been really good to see you this morning and spend the time with you. As we will stay around, but for those who have to leave, let's pray now. Father, thank you for your goodness, your faithfulness through upheavals in our lives, our own lives, our churches, and across the world. And as we consider the things we've talked about this morning, Lord, help us each to remember the 2 or 3 things you want us to put into practice. May your blessing be on each one of us now, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
James, do you want to say anything about the poll before we close it down?
No, that's great. We're done. Thank you. That's been really helpful. It's just very helpful for us as we think about future webinars. Really good. So Pam, have we got some other questions that would be good to explore?
There aren't many from the chat that I've spotted. If I haven't spotted something you put up, please put it up again. If I've missed something. If not, James, there's been some really good suggestions about eco-church events being a really good way to draw people in of all ages.
Love that.
Yeah, the real commitment to that.
Yes.
And one person also said they've had a new congregation established coming out of lockdown, so that's also encouraging.
Yes.
But folks, we'd like your further questions and comments, so either put them in the chat or probably, yes, we're a small enough number now. If you want to unmute and ask a question, please do, or wave your hand at me. I won't see everybody because I've got 2 screens. But
so Chris has been very patient in the top left.
Oh, Chris, I'm sorry I didn't spot you. Do ask us.
Yeah, just a quick one, James. Because I've had this conversation with other people about keeping live stream going. And the 2 you give, I think, are brilliant. You know, people who can't get there, it makes an awful lot of sense.
Yeah.
Also, I think you're right that missionally, we have created almost like a small mission field of people who are searching, looking, browsing, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
My only point really is those who used to be regular attenders on site who are now kind of opting out and using live stream as the default mode. Do we let that carry on, or would you recommend a gentle pastoral approach, as they say?
I love it, Chris. I would recommend a gentle pastoral approach, actually, because I think that, gentle pastoral approach, because there may be reasons that we're not aware of as to why they are still attending online and not on site, and actually being aware of those reasons will help us. So that's why a gentle pastoral approach would be good. B, I think I do want to encourage people to regather physically. I'm of the view that there is something very core to who we are as human beings that actually, and to who we are as the people of God in our gathered worship, that actually is enhanced and enabled by physical gathering. And so I do want to actually suggest to people who have not yet come back, do actually come back to the physical gathering if there's not a good reason not to. And I think what Pam said earlier on is true. I think a lot of people, when they do, they go, oh, I'd forgotten what this was like. Singing together is just not the same online as it is on site. Sharing the communion together is not the same. Learning how to be followers of Jesus because it is both imitative and communal, reflecting something of the sort of incarnational nature of being a Christian. Actually, I think there are aspects of that that occurs best when we are gathered physically. Yes, so Chris, I would go for those pastoral conversations.
Thank you for that response, and thank you for the webinar. Excellent.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Cheers.
Someone who isn't, I don't think, here anymore has suggested that environmental issues are really good with young people and teenagers and trying to get to, they're concerned to get to net zero. They're very passionate about that, and the more we can engage with that, the better.
Diana's just posted as well, Tear Fund have some great resources about connecting with young people and responding to the climate crisis. So great to just Google those and take a look at them. But I'm sure you're right. I'm sure that's a really helpful way. Christian Aid too. Great. Thanks for that one as well. Someone
earlier flagged up the advantage, the opportunities that come with the really good Thy Kingdom Come resources.
Yes, which we're about to enter into that season. Okay.
Yes. I have no more questions. Anyone got anything they'd like to ask before we head off? Oh, yes, John Beckett.
Yeah, hi. It sounds a bit of a negative one, maybe, but it's just intriguing. I was talking to my wife yesterday about this. Actually, for those in leadership, we're just painfully aware of the stresses we're under to try to be innovative and do all the pastoral contacts. And by the way, thank you. It's been a good time, so thank you. It is peculiarly helpful to realise that we are almost all in the same boat. But there's that sort of sense of for people that have returned. And because we're putting the effort in, it's everything's sort of normal, apart from the fact there's a few less people. And it's quite difficult. I find it difficult to know to what extent to share with the whole church that actually the leadership are finding this difficult because there are less of us to do that. It's just trying to get that sort of morale bit right between helping people to be honest and real, and yet actually not demoralizing people in the pews, so to speak. Does that make any sense with anyone else?
If no one else, sense, John.
If no one else gets me, that's fine.
No, total sense. I think you've articulated that really well, and I think that's that what you've articulated is what many in leadership are struggling with. Can I offer just a couple of comments? As always with vulnerability, it's on a scale. And my hope and prayer is that we will find a few people with whom we can be very vulnerable about how we're feeling, through to, with the majority of people, a lower level of vulnerability. So I would say, John, that it is appropriate to say to the whole congregation a few things about what you've just articulated, but not the whole story, probably. But I'm hoping and praying that with your church wardens, if you're in an Anglican context, or your PCC, or your elders, or your deacons, or your staff, whoever you can do that deeper level of vulnerability, so that there are some people around you who really do understand what's going on for you. That would be the first reflection. Second reflection would be this. It is that strange tension in leadership about both defining reality and being a dealer in hope. That part of our role is to help people see what's really going on. So people will notice that there are less people around, and therefore articulating that makes sense, and maybe going a little bit beyond that, not only articulating that reality, but saying why that might be occurring and what we can do about it together would be a really positive way of doing it. And at the same time, we need to be dealers in hope. We need to be we need to help people raise their eyes to the God of the resurrection. And there's always that sort of tension between those two things: define reality and help people to have hope. I guess what I would be saying is, in anything you're doing with the whole gathered people of God, weigh up those two aspects and see if you can get a healthy balance between them. Some of us, by our personality, will have a natural predisposition to be on the defining of reality side. And some of us might have a natural predisposition to be on the dealers of hope side. Well, know where your natural predisposition is and make sure it gets balanced a little bit by the one which you may not so naturally lean towards. And if you're unsure, check it out with others before you go public. to get those 2 or 3 people and say, look, I'm thinking about saying this. How would that come across? Would that be a good way of doing it? So that you've got a bit of perspective before you say stuff that you'll say to the whole group. Those would be my 2 initial reflections.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think I was also just saying it's not just for my own sense of feeling that we're struggling. It's almost to try and voice on behalf of the leadership team that they're finding it difficult.
Yes.
So it's not just me.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I think that's right. Absolutely right. And I would say something of that, but just be a little measured when you're speaking to the whole group. Yeah.
Can I just say thank you both? You've given a wonderful presentation, and I think the lady should have spoken before me, Pauline. She had her hand up. You just make a marvelous team. You do it really well. So.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
so
I've
much.
appreciated what's gone on, and the chat room that we had, it was very excellent. There's only 3 of us in that one, but we covered some interesting subjects. So thank you both. Anyway,
Thank you so
I know
much.
many have gone.
Thank you. Thank you. Has anybody else got any questions at this point?
Stephen, I think.
Yeah.
And Pauline. I don't know if it's Pauline has or not, but she's got her hand up. But Stephen, should we start with you?
Pauline go first? I think she's been waiting a while.
Mine's just very quick one, actually, with regard to streaming. We don't stream, but we do use Zoom. And we've found that there are certain people, that, especially elderly and disabled people, are going, we're still Zooming to them, and they're very much appreciating it. They're very much part of our community. And we do actually visit them as well.
Brilliant, Pauline. That's
Thank
great
you.
to hear. Thank you so
Zoom
much.
as opposed to streaming.
Yeah, thank you. Stephen.
First of all, thank you very much for today, and also thank you all so much for your advice. Earlier in the year, I mentioned I was on the lookout for another job, and you gave me a lot of encouraging advice. And here I am 3 months later working for a waste management company, the pure glamour of it all. So I'll be talking about cardboard recycling and glass recycling for the rest of the day, and until I'm trying to make sense of Macintosh on a Christian doctrine module at St Albans for lay reader training later this evening. But a very quick point, part of your advice in previous talks is to, when I spoke about grant making and grant applications, is to go for it and find a way of making it happen. And we did that, and we had our parish nurse do a lot of webinars online, and they've worked surprisingly well. Now I want to get people gathering together, because I think there's great health benefits from people coming to a public event, hearing a guest speaker, tea, coffee, sticky cakes, and all the rest of it. So I'm in the strange situation now of having to go back to the people that gave us grants, that have given us applications and reviews, saying what happened in the last 2 years. And the answer, well, for much of 2020, the answer was not a lot. So I just wondered how you can just advise how we go forward with grant applications, meeting together, and just generally. One thing I found when we meet and I go to meetings is that I often excuse why I'm there. I'm saying, I'm very sorry, I'm a nobody. I shouldn't really be here. I'm just from so-and-so church. And I think perhaps you could just speak to us a bit of encouragement as we go forward, meeting in public.
So I think your question, Stephen, is about doing public worship well.
Yes, and also not excusing yourself when you're invited to a meeting and you go do the round robin. You often say, "Oh."
It sounds to me like you're answering that for yourself. Actually, that particular one. You don't need to apologise for being there. You are invited to. In terms of grant applications, I think most grant funders understand that money they gave before the pandemic may not yet have been spent, and you can go back to them and say, we just need an extension on this, and most of them will be very helpful about that. Was there a third part, James?
No, I think that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else, just before we finish?
It's just to say thanks to Steve. He was one of our members in the room, and he was wonderful. He gave a very good account of himself. I'll switch.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Oh yes, Ian.
Ian, hi Ian.
Hi James. Is my microphone working?
Yeah, we got you.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Really good. Really, really helpful. Can I just ask you to clarify again, what am I going to give attention to today, this week, and the next? Can you just expand on that if you've got time? just, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, okay. So the nature of church leadership roles is understandably often reactive. Stuff comes up, we need to respond to it, and so we react to it. Now, obviously, there's proactive elements already built in. You know, you do put aside time to prepare for your Sunday service, prepare your sermon, prepare for the PCC meeting. So yeah, there are proactive elements as well. But in the midst of those sort of regular proactive elements, it's very easy to end up in completely reactive mode, only responding to whatever happens to be the latest and most urgent crisis that's come up today. Whereas if we can just get a little bit on the proactive side of things by thinking out our priorities under God, by taking time to actually think about what do I need to give attention to, then we get a little bit more on the proactive side of things. And every leadership role requires time spent in being proactive, not just reactive. And the balance will vary according to what's going on. You know, when the first lockdown occurred, we were all in massive reactive mode. I mean, you had to be. But the danger is you then learn to live in that mode and don't come back to a better blend of reactive and proactive. And one of the ways to get proactive is to put aside a bit of time each week to think out, what am I going to give attention to? Or if you want another way of reframing the question, what under God, if I give some energy to over this next week or month, you decide the time frame, would most further the purposes of God in this place? That's another way of framing the question. What, if I gave some energy, time, and attention to, would most further the purposes of God in this place? And if you think about that and pray about that, I'm almost guaranteed you'll come up with one or two things. And then those are the things to give some time and energy and attention to. The key is not to come up with, well, you might come up with a list of 20, but then to decide just the one or two. So there are two little tools that people find helpful. That some people like using the big three. What are the 3 things this week? The 3 things this month, the 3 things this term, the 3 things this year. Decide your time frame. Another one which some people find really helpful is 6 things over 6 weeks. And they take a little card and they prayerfully identify and then write down those 6 things. I use this one quite often if I want to get a bit of focus on moving something forward, moving several things forward. What are the 6 things that if I could do these over the next 6 weeks would actually move forward the purposes of God in this place? So just little things like that help us to make sure we're still being proactive and not just reactive.
Thank you. It's really helpful. All on the back of an envelope now. Thank you.
There you go.
Anybody else?
I'll say goodbye now anyway, and thank you for everything today. It's wonderful.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Peter.
Peter.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any more questions or comments? Okay.
I think we're probably coming into
I think
land.
we're wrapping up now. Thank you so much, everybody. We look forward to seeing you next time. And yeah, do look out for those other events that we talked about earlier. Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Hey.